Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 3, Episode 9, A Farewell. In this episode, Nandor decides that he has kind of had it, and he is going to go into super slumber. Meanwhile, Colin is celebrating, his 100th birthday. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. All right. I'm gonna come out swinging on this one, kids. This episode fucking sucked. It was very bad. Is this just me? Like, what the hell happened here? I didn't laugh a single time, and everything felt so half-assed and weird. I think it feels extra terrible because the last episode was so good and sort of fascinating to me and brought up a lot of really interesting questions. And then this episode it not only slammed on the brakes, it slammed on the brakes and the car crashed anyway. The brake lines were cut. That makes it sound more interesting than it was. I want to warn folks going into this that you're about to hear me really rip this apart, and I don't love doing this, but it deserves it. It really does. And especially because this show tends to be so good that I have a particular expectation at this point, and when it doesn't meet those expectations, it's just going to be a lot more egregious, it feels like to me. I'm going to be honest with you guys, too, that, I know that there are some podcasts out there that cover television, and they're very careful about checking who directed what episodes and who wrote the script for what episodes and whatnot. And that is something that I always, in my hypotheticals, aspire to do and be more organized about. And I have not done that at all, ever, with almost anything I've covered. So this may be a case of this, the director for this episode just being somebody who isn't awesome and coming in and just kind of shitting the bed. And maybe if I looked into it, I would notice that other episodes they directed also sucked. But as of right now, I'm really startled at how not funny this was. It just felt like, what it felt like to me is if everything had been improvised from beginning to end. If there had been no script almost at all, and every moment of it was just an improv troupe. And if it were improv, it might have worked. I might have found it more funny if it had the sort of manic energy that a lot of improv can have. Things that you might not otherwise find that funny are more funny in improv because it comes out of left field and you can feel the other people on the stage are as surprised as you are at the direction things are going. And so that's fun. But this didn't even have that kind of lightness and feeling of surprise to it. It was the kind of script that I feel like somebody who doesn't like this show would write to make fun of this show. Does that make sense? Oh, Asher's in the chat. Hey, lady, she says. Sorry, Asher. I agree that this episode wasn't up to standard. It did a couple of gags and did them way too much, and they weren't that funny to start with, and then they got run into the ground. Yep. That's really, I think you're right, Asher. That's really what kind of really made it so tiresome to watch, was how the jokes got run into the ground. I don't know what's going on. It was like even the music felt off. You know, the show tends to have these really great little stings of sound effect and music cues sometimes that can add something, and it didn't even do that. I noticed this especially in the scene where the like delegation comes to visit and they're each introduced. The total lack of imagination in each of these characters felt really weird. I just all right, so I'm going to get into this. I do want to mention too something that I failed to mention anything about when I was recording for the last episode, but the theme song for the previous episode is in another language, and I'm not sure what the language is. If anybody wants to help me out with that, but I had intended to comment on that, and then I got completely sidelined talking about life and death and midlife crises and, you know, what does it all mean? And I completely forgot about the theme song. But I was delighted by that at the time, the fact that they decided to do something like that. And I'm actually kind of a big fan of the concept of using the same song but doing covers of it by different artists. Like, this is something that I have seen before, and obviously this was a special case. They're not doing this all the time with this show. But I really like it in theory, and it doesn't always work. The Wire was a show that did that, and really, I don't feel like anybody ever beat the first season. The first season's version of the song was just the superior version, and every season after that, when they changed it, I was like, no, not as good. But this starts off, and I was really hoping for this. So I don't know how, like, I think this is part of it as well. It started where I was hoping, and then it just didn't really go anywhere. We start off with Guillermo attempting to deprogram Nandor. But the thing that's weird about this is that he's deprogramming him in ways that don't feel relevant. So I got what I wanted in terms of, like, we're going to pick up right where we left off. Nandor is still locked in this cage. We've still got, like, you know, him feeling like he was robbed of something that he cared about and loved and was actually happy doing. And that's all there. But Guillermo trying to deprogram him is him showing him, like, Rorschach tests of ink blots that look like bats, of a rag doll he made that looks like Nandor, being like, who's this supposed to be? That's not the kind of problem Nandor was having. He wasn't brainwashed to the point that he didn't recognize his friends or know what objects are. He was brainwashed to the thing is, I was going to say he was brainwashed to be willing to kill himself, but we didn't even really see that, which I commented on in the last episode. The brainwashing was simply that he didn't really want to be a vampire anymore, and that he was sick of his own regular life and enjoyed being surrounded by people who were, like, upbeat and wanting to do something different. And so the deprogramming thing got my hopes up for a second, and then it's just nothing. It like I said, it feels like somebody just got told what happened in the last episode, and they're like, so we're going to start this episode with them trying to, like, deprogram him, and a person who has absolutely no idea what actually happened last episode wrote a very generic idea of what it looks like to deprogram brainwashing. And not even really. It's more like they're just determining whether or not he's got dementia. That's the kind of testing this is, you know? Like, do you recognize him? This is your nephew, Steven. This doesn't even feel like it doesn't make sense, you know? It's nothing. So this whole scene is not funny because it doesn't, none of it, like, circles back around. There's no, like, reference to anything. There's no feeling of place with it. All of it falls really flat. Nandor's, like, approach in the scene is to just ignore the way Guillermo is attempting to engage him, which is not fun to watch either. Like, if you're gonna have Nandor attempting to resist, make it interesting. Make him do something that signals, just ignoring is not fun in circumstances like this. And the only part that I did enjoy was eventually Colin comes in and he has got the cattle prod and he threatens Nandor with it, and Nandor grabs it and just holds onto it, and it begins to heat up until finally Colin is the one that has to let go of it. And that was fun. I did like that because Nandor is just so incredibly over it. And if this had been the way he reacted to what Guillermo's doing, if he reached out, grabbed the doll that Guillermo is saying, who's this supposed to be? And ripped it in half and threw it at him. Okay. Not amazing, but it would be something. And so, Asher is in the chat. I was just disappointed by the covers, which was a shame because otherwise the show was so damn good. Asher is talking about The Wire. Yeah, it was weird. The covers were it felt like uniquely bad covers in their own way. And I was always just like, why is this the one you picked? Were there really that few to choose from? You couldn't have commissioned somebody really good to do? Okay, it was weird. But anyway, so then we get Nandor talking about how unjust it is that everyone here is ganging up on him, that it has come to this. My friends have imprisoned me, and I'm not brainwashed. For years, I have single-handedly held this house together, which truly is not even remotely the case. You disrespect me. You contradict me. Nadja, no, we don't. He says, Laszlo, you are the laziest vampire I have ever had the misfortune of meeting. Born with a silver dick in your mouth. Never even lifted a hand to help me take care of this house. And I love that Laszlo is just like, yep, agrees that he never lifted a hand. There's no argument from him at all. Because you were both too occupied with giving constant self-pleasure. Nadja, you openly laugh and mock my romantic tribulations, which are a cause of great pain for me. And we cut over to Nadja trying really hard not to laugh, which... has she? This was another moment where I was kind of like, look, I would go with it if the joke here were Nandor thinks he held the house together. That's not what's happened. He thinks Laszlo's lazy, and that's not true. He thinks Nadja's laughing at him, and that hasn't been true either. The house thing is not true. Laszlo being lazy is true, and Laszlo admits to that. And Nadja laughing here seems to suggest that she thinks that's funny. But when we saw him dealing with the woman who turns out to be a weird half vampire, half werewolf hybrid, Nadja wasn't mocking him. She was trying to get him to not have his heart broken again. So that also felt weirdly, just the whole, there's no actual joke here. It's just a really strange... I said it earlier, and I really feel like it's the best way to say it. It's like somebody who doesn't really like this show, but has seen one or two, wrote this script, and is just doing the most generic, broad strokes job they can. And I don't know what to make of it. I just don't. So anyway... Colin says something about how do me next. This is fun. And he says, I would not even remember your name if it was not written on a piece of paper that I keep in my pocket at all times, which, is pretty brutal. And notably, Laszlo kind of steps in and says, damn, that was low. And considering what we find out is going on with Laszlo and Colin later, it makes sense that he is the one to say something here. So at least that has a sort of through line. So all this ends with Nandor saying, there is only one option left to me. I am sick of this. I am going to go into a super slumber. And when he says this, Nadja has this incredibly strong reaction, like he just basically proposed that he's going to shoot his own head off in front of them. But Guillermo doesn't know what this means. And this is the kind of thing where I feel like the better way to write this is have Guillermo maybe not be familiar with this exact term, but use context clues to figure it out. Because a super slumber feels pretty self-explanatory to me. And Guillermo just sort of looking around and going, what's going on, is super out of character for him, to me at least. Like, that's not the vibe that he gives, is like completely clueless and looking to the others for help, really. So we find out, without much surprise, that a super slumber is a vampire choosing to go to sleep for a long period of time. And it can go from anywhere from 50 years to like 300 years. And the way that Nadja describes it is they're trying to sort of live out a bad epoch. If there is a time that things are getting really hard, it's just better to lay low and kind of like get through it. And hopefully by the time you wake up again, the worst of whatever the hardships are at the time are over. And they are talking about like the realities of waking up after a super slumber. And first of all, Nadja describes how you're going to be this like starved weakling when you awaken because you haven't fed the whole time. So that's going to be, you know, the physical changes, it sounds like, would be pretty extreme. I don't know if you just immediately restore when you drink blood again, because the Baron, he continued to look like the desiccated husk even after drinking blood. So I don't really know what the like changes are, how permanent they are. But also, all of the people that you knew who were human are likely going to be dead when you wake. And all of your vampire friends will probably have scattered, because vampires do not stay in the same place long enough for people to notice that they're not aging, is the vibe. I think, you know, we've heard that that's a thing, but then from what we've seen, there are exceptions to that. So I don't know. But anyway, basically, when you decide to do this, you are agreeing that you're going to leave your entire life behind and you're going to be starting over. And there's a real like sense of, it's like he's dying. You know, it's like everybody is saying goodbye to him and he is choosing to go into a coma or be cryogenically frozen or something. And considering that this episode is called A Farewell, I could see people assuming that's what it refers to. I really did find myself wondering if Nandor was going to like leave the show for a time, you know, if he was going to turn out to like take a vacation and they would have somebody else come in or something like that, because things can happen, you know, an actor gets an offer to like be in a movie and he needs to be away for a little while to do that. Or in the case of Dairy Girls, you know, the girl who played what's her face? I cannot remember. I'm sorry. She got the role in Bridgerton, and they wound up having to do some weird choices in the plot in order to have her recording separately from the rest of the girls. So I thought maybe that was what was going on here. And I was really prepared for it to be like, oh, he's gone, and then things come up where actually Nandor is needed. Actually, his knowledge might be helpful. And that up to now, he has felt kind of superfluous, and Nadja's the one who has taken care of things. But now they're being put in specific scenarios where Nandor's got some value and is, you know, they're starting to see the ways in which he can be a help. That is not really what we get. So he goes down for his super slumber. It's this big, like, you know, they do this sort of ceremony, and Nadja is reading this goodbye letter. It's kind of funny because she's like going from sobbing to then totally fine and then back to sobbing instantly, which I do kind of enjoy that bit. And she says, she's talking about how, like, I'm going to miss you so much and all of your help with the Vampiric Council. And then she stops and looks at the camera and says, because together we get it done. And she does it in this, like, you know, political commercial sort of voice. But when it's Laszlo's turn, all he wrote was Nan. And then he, for some reason, forgot that he hadn't written any further than that. And so he opened it. That's all he's got. Again, you know, like, just, this episode, there are so many opportunities where you could have done something genuinely funny. And they just went for the absolute lowest, like, the low hanging fruit. It's like not even. It was already on the ground. Is the way I want to play it here. This isn't even hanging fruit. This is fruit that you, like, had to stoop and pick up, kind of thing. I just can't believe this. It's you guys. They are better than this. What happened this episode? I really want to know. You know, like, everything, there is so much setup here that could have been utilized really, really well. Why did they go in this direction? I don't understand what they're thinking here. So anyway, Laszlo just wrote Nan and that was it. And then we have Colin Robinson in the corner and he's crying, and Nandor assumes that this is about him going into his super slumber. But Colin says, I can't help but think that you're only doing this to avoid coming to my 100th birthday party. And Nandor says that he didn't even know it was his birthday. And Colin says, that's the other reason I'm crying. Now, this is the thing that is like, I feel like this episode is a good example, after the last one especially, of them really not seeming to know what to do with Colin Robinson anymore. Or they feel as if they've hit a bit of a dead end and they're not, like, the direction that they have taken with him feels really weird, where they're simultaneously going to make him extremely bland and annoying and tiresome and boring because he is an energy vampire, but then really resentful of the fact that none of the other vampires, like, pay that much attention to him, which works sometimes if you set it up, but I feel like it's sort of a go-to in a way that it wasn't in previous seasons. And I don't know, it feels from the beginning of the season when, you know, we start things off and the camera goes to him and he begins, like, talking and somebody else interrupts him and is like, shut up, Colin. And he's just like, well, I guess just fuck me then. We didn't really see that kind of relationship before. It was always just like, oh my God, Colin, stop, you're so boring. But it's turned into him being sort of like the Gary Gergich, if those of you out there have watched Parks and Rec, where he's the joke of the household, and that doesn't feel consistent with the way things have been going with him in other seasons. I mean, it makes sense that they would avoid him because they always think that he's trying to feed on them, but it has gone from that to, like, real animosity, and it's just, I don't know. I I had sort of noticed it, but was willing to go with it initially. And now that I see this is where it seems to be ending, I'm like, maybe it's for the best that you got rid of Colin. If they did, I don't know. He might come back. There might be a whole thing, you know. But as of right now, if I'm accepting the fact that Colin did in fact die, I am okay with that, to be honest, if this is the best they're going to do with him. Because it seems like they kind of hit a wall. So, anyway, they put him down for his slumber, and Guillermo gets really emotional, and he closes the casket, and then when he goes outside, he gets mad at the camera guys, and is like, does everything have to be on film? Can you guys just give me a second, please? Can you just... And the camera cuts away, and when it cuts back, he's boarding up the door. Do you guys see what I'm saying here? Saying, guys, can you give me a second, please? Does everything have to be filmed? Usually, you cut away, and then you cut back, and he's doing something really unexpected, or something kind of funny, or something that's like, you know, pathetic in a very specific way for Guillermo. But that's not what happens. They just cut back and he's just boarding the door up. There's no actual joke. It's not funny. It's just him asking for space and then doing the next logical thing, which is extremely boring. And I don't even know why we had to see it, why this moment was here. You know, it just, so he is boarding this door up, and it's supposed to really cement the finality of the moment. And then evil Mabel shows up, swooping down the chimney, and she says that the Vampiric Council has invited you to receive a delegation from the old world here at your home with the intent of inspecting the progress you've made thus far in running the council. And it doesn't occur to anybody in this moment that Nandor is down for his eternal slumber and what that looks like. Or you say eternal, his super slumber. And we get one bit that I did find funny of Nadja talking about, I've always dreamed of meeting someone important. No one important ever came to our village. There was one time the rubbish man came to collect all the shit, and he assigned pieces of rubbish for the children and autographed it. We danced for the next 3 months. And it's not that great. It's pretty funny, and it would be extra funny if it were improv. But it feels like if this were a script, like punch this up a little bit, you know? You give the rubbish collector man a name, and then when he comes to collect their shit, you have him, like, it describes specifically what he comes to get and describes specifically what it is that he gave to each of the children, and have her talk about the thing that he gave to her and that she still has it somewhere with his name written on it. You know, you take it like those extra few steps, and then it's genuinely like the specificity is what makes it actually funny. But what is so weird here is that it's not specific. It feels like the outline of a joke. But also we know that Nadja has met important people before now. We've watched her do that more than once on this show. So for the joke to be that she hasn't met anyone important, I mean, we know that's not true as audience members. So if you're going to go in the direction of her being excited, that's not the angle to approach it from. That doesn't work. And that's the way all of the jokes seem to be this episode, is that like they are only half thought out and they don't really align with what we know about the characters otherwise. So anyway, Colin, because he, like, this is all a very last second thing, he is supposed to be having his birthday party that evening. he is really feeling salty about the fact that he is going to have to share space with the delegation from the old world. Now, again here, and I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry, because they deserve it. They are capable of better than this. What I thought we were going to get here, because Colin's talking about his birthday party that he has planned. He is talking about, like, at one point they're playing the hamster dance, which I'll confess, I've never even heard of the hamster dance. And they were playing it on this card that's like one of those musical ones, and you open it and it plays a little song. Didn't ring a bell. But he's talking about dancing the Humpty Hump and the way that he wants them to gather in a circle while he does it. And it sounds like Colin has a real plan here. What I was hoping we were going to get was a weird clash of events where Colin was having his 100th birthday and had invited his own people, and the delegation was going to come, and there was going to be a push-pull situation between two totally different energies of event happening in the same house. So we were going to have the extreme dignity and solemnity and seriousness and goth vibes of the vampiric delegation and what Nadja's trying to show them, you know, is going on in their home. And then we were going to have Colin over here with a DJ and really, like, you know, bad 90s hip hop and pop, and probably, like, you know, if we're going to go for it, we would have all kinds of sort of generic big party stuff, you know, like those light up necklaces. If, for example, what I was talking about when I did Unsober with Rashawn and we were planning our funerals, everything that's like so over the top that I said I wanted at my funeral, that's what Colin Robinson would have for his 100th birthday party, right? And it would be just a little bit lame. It wouldn't be actually awesome, which is definitely how it would be for my funeral, no doubt. But it would be goofy and silly, and it would have the feeling of like a kid's bar mitzvah, and just decidedly not the vibe that Nadja would be like desperately trying to cultivate over on her side. So they would be having these like really solemn moments where they're making a toast, and in the background you can hear the Humpty Hump playing, like the bass just hitting through the walls, causing things to shake, and her trying desperately to hang on to whatever scraps of, you know, like it just, I had this whole thing that I was hoping for, and it just had a lot of potential. He's talking about his party, and we see no evidence that there was any party ever. The only thing we see is that he comes out in a suit. Otherwise, him talking about how there's a party, there isn't. It's just that it's his birthday. That's it. So it all gets completely eclipsed, and it's as if it just weren't going to happen at all. So, all right. So it's just like, so that's going on. And then we get the actual delegation showing up. They have a moment where Guillermo tries to go to Nandor and tell him, you need to wake up because they're sending this delegation and you need to pretend to like be a part of things. And he's like, fine, I am going to hand over all of my power. I completely relinquish control. You are now sole leader. Congratulations. Long live the king. Good night forever. And they're like, well, what are we going to tell them? He says, just tell them that I was interfering and you killed me. They love that shit. And again, yes. And it's a weird thing because Nadja seems like she's loath to do this, but we saw Nadja rip the heart out of a man who hadn't paid his dues on time with no compunction whatsoever. And so we know that Nadja just doesn't have an issue with approaching stuff like this. So the fact that it's Nandor who has to suggest this, and that Nadja seems at all resistant to it. Once again, completely out of character to me. Like, you know, it and look, I keep wanting to apologize for being so negative, but I really did warn you guys out of the gate that I was just very, very disappointed in this episode and that I was going to rip it apart. I feel like I'm pretty much delivering on what I promised, and I think all of my criticisms are proving to be completely valid as I go through them. There are times where I'll like start to talk about something and sort of realize I'm mad about nothing, or that I got it wrong, or I misinterpreted something. I'm not having that so far, right? So I'm all right with it. Oh yeah, Laszlo says something like, that would be a humiliating end for you. And Nandor says, who cares? Not me. And that feels out of character. You know, Laszlo caring about whether that's a humiliating end. Laszlo would have come up with a reason that Nandor died that would have definitely like involved fucking to death or something. That's what Laszlo would have done. And Nandor would have been somebody who, if not just suggested, oh, okay, I'm just going to tell them that I killed you because you were a threat to my power, he might hem and haw about it. He eventually would be fine with it because he is at a point where he doesn't really care about anything, and that's sort of the point of his arc at the moment. But everybody just feels like they're behaving against their character at the moment. So, all right. He goes back to sleep. Guillermo goes once again to board up his door, which he keeps doing, even though they keep waking him up. And then we have the arrival of the delegation, and the way that this goes. So the doorbell rings, and Evil Mabel, it's Guillermo who announces them, and Evil Mabel will explain to Nadja who they are as they come in. And the first one is the Contessa Carmilla de Mornay. And this woman comes in who is vaguely familiar, but I cannot place her. Evil Mabel says, rumor has it, she did it with a horse. So that's the joke here, I guess. Then we have one of the men who was responsible for burning down the Library of Alexandria. And this is, what is his name? Is this Alex Cross? Mark Cross? Trying to remember. All I know is that I remember recently finding out some things about him that made me really dislike this guy. And I'm not going to get into it all right now, but seeing him here, I felt like this really put a nail in the coffin of this episode. I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, so he's here, okay. And the joke with him is entirely that he is an old vampire who I guess has like a young, hot gold digger girlfriend who does know that he's a vampire, but like people are wondering if she's aware that he's never going to die, so she's not going to be able to get his money. And just the whole like, oh, look, this old ugly man has this super young hot girlfriend / wife who is a real fish out of water. That's not funny anymore. You need more than this these days. Like, come on. Just so boring. Like, this feels like it's out of an 80s movie kind of thing. You know? There's not even anything particularly fun about her, except at one point she's like, he says that she doesn't like blood and she doesn't really like grown-up food either. So Guillermo brings her chicken nuggets and like buttered noodles as a side. And that's the closest they get to like a decent joke about her. And all of it just feels like the outline of a joke. It feels like when somebody's doing the vague storyboard of what we're going to do, and then they never got past it, and everybody just improv'd their way through it, but without having fun. So, Ms. T says, David Cross, thank you. Yes. David Cross, just, like I said, not going to get into it, but not a good guy. So yeah, this whole thing with her, and her name is Coco, it's all just fine. And then we go to, let's see, this gentleman needs no introduction. He's very well known to me. This is Quinn, the great vampire, right-hand man of Deacon Frost of House Erebus. And he's actually Donald Logue. Now, this guy, I think what she's referencing is his role in Blade. I know this guy from Vikings. So when she's introducing him as, you know, with all this stuff related to Blade, I have seen Blade once. I don't remember it very well because, spoilers, it's not that good. And this dude, when he walked in, I was just like, oh, hey, it's that guy from Vikings. And then there's this whole other thing with him, but it's supposed to be that, like, he got so into the role that he just decided that he was going to go for it. And considering that they have done the sort of, you know, the cameo episodes in other seasons, I feel really bad because this is a fun thing and he could have had a good time. And instead he wound up in this episode, which I really feel like he deserved better because he was bringing a lot more energy than anybody else was. So yeah, I think that's the last of like the intros that we see. And then we cut to the dinner and, you know, the thing with the chicken nuggets and whatever. Donald gets up and he eats one of the waiters and then says it's exquisite. And he offers to share the guy with anybody else. Guys, anybody, did anyone out there find this particularly funny or different or anything? This is bottom tier. The vampire getting up, sampling the staff, not just saying, oh, that's what they're there for. Of course, please help yourself. And him offering to hand the kid around, and Evil Mabel saying, thank you so much for sharing. All of this, I feel like we have seen a million times. Like on this show alone, never mind everywhere else that does vampire shit ever. This is just, it's nothing. It's nothing. So then we cut to all of them talking about wanting to see the dead body of the like foe that Nadja felled because she has to say that she killed Nandor. My first issue here is that I was under the impression that you stab a vampire and their body doesn't stick around. Like if you were to stake them. I don't think she says what she did to kill him. She just says, I killed him dead. And it would have been very easy to just say, oh, he's not, like, we don't have a body. They insist on seeing the body, which already felt weak. And then her caving to showing them the body felt extra weak. There's a million ways you could have gotten around having to do this. And Nadja is smart, usually, and would have very easily sidestepped this, but she does not. So then we have Guillermo running upstairs and telling Nandor that we have to like wake you up again because this is what's about to happen. And then we get the most drawn out, unfunny bit. Everybody streams into his room. Guillermo opens the coffin. Nandor's laying there. And I think it's David Cross's character brings up the fact that he was rumored to have an enormous member, like the biggest you've ever seen. And doesn't anybody want to see it just for fun? And so we have the obligatory stripping Nandor, everybody looking at it, discussing it. And then inevitably, this dude has to like reach into the coffin and touch it. I am so bored. This is so boring. Really? This is the best you got? come on. Come on. I mean, this is a real low point. This is truly embarrassing. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how lazy all of this feels to me. Nobody in the room seems to be having fun either. The only people who are really bringing energy are Nadja and Donald Logue. Nadja's doing her best, and it feels like she is aware it's not good. Like the actress is desperately trying to save this sinking episode by sheer energy alone. Whereas everyone else, it seems to me, they all feel very keenly that they are in a subpar scene and they aren't fully checked in, you know? It's just, and it goes on for so long, you guys. Like, it's just not, it's barely funny enough to include in the episode at all. I would have scrapped it entirely and done a totally different thing. But then for it to take this long is just insulting to the audience. It just is. And eventually they all just leave and nobody discovers that he's actually still alive. Nobody like questions anything, which to me brings up another question. Why is everyone so interested to see his dead body when he, like, vampires are dead and there's nothing different about him in this state? Nobody asks to see how he died. Nobody asks what Nadja did to kill him. There's no, like, in the context of what she has told them, the way everybody reacts makes no sense. Nobody's asking the questions they should be asking, but they're asking questions that nobody would. I want to see the body. Why? They would have seen a million bodies. And if Nandor were alive and they just came over and were like, hey, drop trow, he would have, because that's just who he kind of was. He would have been fine with it. So this whole like, oh, I would like to see it. I would never have been able to see it otherwise. Like, if he was rumored to have the biggest dick ever, people would already been talking to him about it. This would have been a whole different situation. It's just like everything within the context of this scene works against itself and is just written really sloppily. So they finally leave and he's real mad at being put through all of this, which I would too, simply because this is very lazy. I can't, y'all, it's like a full, like 8-minute scene out of, you know, a 30-minute long episode. I mean, come on. And then we have the toast and not just trying to just give a regular toast. And this is when Laszlo interrupts. And he talks about Colin and that it's his birthday. And he is weirdly like, I don't like the guy, but also I'm proud to be his friend. It's a weird sort of... the joke is supposed to be that he's attempting to be like affectionate while not actually being nice. But again, it's just not written very well. And then Nadja flips out on him after everyone leaves because he made this toast and nobody gives a shit that it's Colin's birthday. Nadja, this happens all the time. It's really not a big deal. Her getting as angry as she does at him for this feels really weird because it's not like it's a long drawn out toast. It's actually fairly short. It's fine. And considering, like, you know, but it's supposed to be the setup for him to explain to her that Colin is going to be dead by sunrise. And then we get this weird reveal that a ways back when he was looking through the library archives with Colin, he came across some information about energy vampires and that it said at the age of 100, they die like that when they turn 100. That is the end of their life and they power down. And I didn't know what to make of this in the moment. You know, I was like, did he misread it? Is it going to be that, like, he stops being a regular energy vampire and turns into something else? Like, you know, it's a transitional thing. I didn't know what to think. So imagine my surprise when what we get is this deeply tedious scene of Colin Robinson experiencing stomach trouble and basically farting himself to death. And that's what we get. It's a really long scene of him just farting, lots of fart noise sound effects, lots of physical acting of everyone in the room acting like it really stinks in here. I mean, really, this is truly scraping bottom. It's so bad. And eventually, Guillermo goes and gets Nandor because he's like, oh, Colin's dying and I really felt like we should all be here for this. I guess. The constant waking up of Nandor should be funny, but it doesn't feel funny. It doesn't feel necessary in the moments that it happens. And if it were so deeply unnecessary that the fact they keep going to wake him up were funny in and of itself, like that the joke is they're finding any old excuse to wake him when previously they never needed him. Now they need him for every little thing. We could work with that. We could do something with that. But instead, the reasons they're going to wake him up feel just important enough that the joke isn't really there. And yet, nobody has really shown that they give a shit about Colin. So, like, Guillermo's urge to go and do this doesn't stem from anything, like, organic for me, anyway. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chat. Miss T says, Condi Alexander as the Contessa was in Scandal. Oh, was she Olivia Pope's mom? Is that where I'm recognizing her from? Maybe that's what it is. Asher says, I hated this scene so much. It was just not funny, not even a little. Ms. T says, tedious is correct. Asher says, I normally watch the show so closely because of all the jokes they sneak in visually, and generally it's such smart humor, but this episode was, ugh. I was on my phone for most of it just listening. Yeah, I was like, I tend to sort of like play little phone games and stuff while I'm watching, and it doesn't take up much of my attention. It's just like, you know, I think having ADD, it's just a weird way to help myself concentrate, if anything. But I just was glad to be on my phone this time. You know, there's a lot of episodes where if I miss something, I'm like, ooh, I really want to see that. So I'm going to rewind and like fully pay attention. I never felt an inkling of that in this whole thing. So eventually they bring, like, Guillermo returns. He's got Nandor with him. And Nandor is really mad at the fact that he feels like Colin has pretended to be dead before just for attention, and that they're all falling for this again. He thinks is like really pitiful. It's so obvious to him what's going on, and he is so frustrated that he goes to like punch Colin in the face. And what's weird about this is that we know how strong Nandor is. And he caves Colin's head in completely. But that would have happened even if Colin were not dead, as far as I understand. Unless it's supposed to be that an energy vampire becomes thin and brittle as an eggshell when they die. Otherwise, that punch would have just killed him anyway. It would have been different if he like grabbed him by the shoulder to shake him and like Colin had begun to turn into dust or something, and there was clear evidence that, you know what I mean? But because of what it is that he chose to do, especially after the beginning of the episode, watching him grab the cattle prod and just hold on to it, we know how strong and impervious Nandor is. That punch or whatever it was he was going to do, I assume would have done the same thing even if Colin were actually still alive. So it's a weird moment where he caves this man's face in. I will say it's some pretty good practical effects. They made a very convincing model of Colin and then filled it with some kind of like viscous goo. So it really looks unnerving when he does it. That was effective. But the logic of it doesn't work at all. You know what I'm saying? Like the whole... And so this causes Nandor to step back and be like, I guess he's actually dead. This is really sad. As he looks at the camera. And it's like, I truly, y'all, I was waiting for absolutely anything to make this funny the whole time. And when he just punches him and then he says, well, I guess this is really sad. And that's the way the episode ends. I was like, really? This is it? This is like, and it just cuts to credits. And I waited and there's no post-credits scene. I thought for sure the way this ended, we were going to have a post-credit scene of some kind in order to like rescue this at all. But nope, that's it. It's just, so I don't know, maybe it's supposed to be that Colin like deflates and his hand went through him in a way that he shouldn't have done, normally. But again, this was all done in a really lazy way. So if that were the effect they were going for, I think they would have had to do it a totally different way and make that abundantly clear, which they didn't do. And that's it. That's the end. Is fucking Nandor just being like, I guess he really is dead, and wiping his goopy hand off on the pillowcase. And that's how this absolute turd of an episode wraps up. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. I genuinely am like angry at the fact that this is the second to last episode of the season and they did this. Like, what the fuck, guys? Really? Come on. This truly felt like a completely different show. It just did. It felt like it was written by much less funny people. This was like South Park. That kind of thing. That level. All of the like farting jokes, all of the let's touch his pee-pee jokes. It was just, we have like dollops of immature humor because of Laszlo, but this felt like that was all it was. Asher says the jarring ending would have been a lot more effective if the rest of the episode was actually funny. Agreed. And like, I said that maybe they've run out of things to do with Colin Robinson and they just decided to get rid of him. Okay, fine, but he just deserved better than this. I'm not sad that he's gone because it felt like they had run out of stuff for him to do. I was really kind of starting to see that. But for it to be like this, I just think he could have been a lot. It could have been more worthy of him. And I don't know. Ms. T says this writer also did the Cloak of Duplication episode. See, now that was a pretty fun episode. It wasn't perfect, but I thought that was a fun idea. So what the hell, man? Like, I'm just rapping with you guys in the moment saying, for instance, they could have done, and I feel like things that are coming off the very top of my head are all way funnier. And I'm not a professional. I don't do this for a living. If I can just very easily, with almost no effort, come up with something that's actively funnier, what are you guys for? What are y'all getting paid for over there? Come on. Anyway, so I'm sorry, super negative episode, not my fault. It's their fault. There are times where I'm like, look, I read this a certain way and I recognize not everybody would, and this isn't one of them. I have a really hard time imagining anybody out there who likes this show liked this episode. I feel like if I were to look up on IMDb lowest rated episodes, this would be the very, very top, worst, most hated episode. Unless it's another one that I haven't yet seen. But out of the ones I've seen so far, absolute stinker. By far the worst. So, there you have it, folks. I am really a little trepidatious now about the finale of season 3, which is I'll be recording on tomorrow. So, fingers crossed for that one, everyone. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.